Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Vodafone Royal Academy of Engineering lecture in mobile and mobile communications and networks. This is the. I should just say, in case you, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Walker. I will chair the event this evening. I'm from King's College, and formerly I was the Research and Development Director of the Vodafone Group. So I've been around with these lectures since they started. This is in fact, the second lecture in the fifth series of 3 lectures. So each year we have 3 lectures. And hopefully we'll continue for a number of other years. And for each lecture series, we try and specialise in something or theme it in some way. And the theme for this series is the social impact of mobile communications and networks. So we're looking very much at the impact of the technology rather than the technology per se or the applications of the technology. Now, before I introduce our speaker, there are a couple of things I want to say. First of all, I'm reminded that in the room, as you go downstairs, the ground floor on the right-hand side, as you go towards the front of the building, they're the finalist exhibition of the Roberts Awards, and you're all invited to take a peek, go in, have a look round. It's very impressive, and I won't tell you what the winner is because it's there, stands in front of you. But I would encourage you to go to have a look. And the second, I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge the fact that I think for almost every lecture that we've had since the beginning of this 5 years, there's been one person who's come, I think, to almost everyone. He's sat at the front of the audience and he's always asked a question, and that's Bill Barlow, Sir William Barlow, who died recently. Many of you will know he was a former president, or is former president of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and was one of the early directors of Vodafone. In fact, he was one of the first board members of the Vodafone Group. So I think it's very sad that he won't be here to pose his question this evening, but I just wanted to remember that. So with that rather sad note, let me now move on to our speaker. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Tarek Elabbady from Microsoft. And let me say a few words about him before I hand over to him to address us this evening. He was born and educated in Egypt. He received his PhD in electrical engineering from Purdue University, where he studied electromagnetic fields and signal processing. And while there, he received the Geddes-Hauptman Award for Outstanding Researcher at the university in the Electrical Engineering Department. From there, he did an MBA at the University of Washington and then joined Microsoft in the Windows Group, where he led a variety of Windows developments. His most notable contribution was to the foundation of the Microsoft Windows Media Center in 2002, so he actually founded that division of the company. Later in 2005, he founded the Advanced Technology Labs in Cairo and moved back to his own home country to establish the first Microsoft R&D labs in that part of the world, in the Middle East and Africa. There they focus on digital content services, technologies, and the research spans everything from natural language processing through to computer vision and machine learning. In 2010, he was appointed as a senior director of the Microsoft Advanced Technology Labs, where he is located now in Belgium and still has responsibility for his labs out in Cairo, as well as a rather more extended brief to cover all of Europe and the Middle East and Africa. So he's going to talk to us this evening about social media technologies in the Arab Spring Revolution. So Dr. Elabbady, may I invite you to address us.
thank Mike first. No, it's a beautiful introduction. I think it's a pleasure to be here and an honor, like I said, to be a part of this series of talks and to speak at this time specifically, being an Egyptian, talking about the revolution that is moving basically a lot of us, not just the Egyptians. I think the entire world is following steps. And I wouldn't take credit for anything, but to be actually in Tahrir Square as at least a few days of this revolution. And I think that's what got me here today, is that my good friend Andrew Blake from Microsoft, who is a member of the Royal Academy, he saw the picture that I sent actually from my mobile phone out of Tahrir Square during the revolution with me and a couple of colleagues down there. And that's, I think, what got him to think of me when he got this invitation first. So I thank Andrew for that. And I hope you will actually enjoy the show, because I don't think there's enough slides for me to include. I think you will see a lot of actually technologies that was inspired in the lab that we started in Egypt maybe 4 years before the revolution, just to show that there are actually real trends of these technologies that was developing way before the revolution. And I think it instigated the revolution, but by no means it was the driver of the revolution. So it helped. I will also basically bring some of the technology that was inspired during the revolution and a little bit after the revolution. Actually, the latest will be a week ago. I think we made it public a week ago. So this is actually the journey. So without further ado, this is actually a quick look at how I'm basically going to run this show. I think we're going to talk a little bit about defining what is social media. It's an overused term these days. And I think it's going to change the world. And it's going to change the world only if it makes its way into money-making. So during the talk, I hope you will see where the economy is going to really benefit from these set of technologies. I think there's a lot of money that's going to come out of this, and that's what's going to make it really change the world. And then we talk about Arabia specifically. I mean, this Arab Spring started in Tunisia and is still making its way in Syria. So it's not about Egypt. Egypt is very central. It's very big in population. And historically, any social trends in Egypt usually actually gets adopted in the rest of Arabia. So if things happen, you will see a lot of the pictures coming from Egypt because we happen to be there, but a lot of it actually apply to Libya, Syria, and Yemen. In fact, actually, most of the sharing during the revolution came from Tunisia into Egypt. It's how to deal with tear gas, how to deal with this. I mean, it was very inspiring, actually. And then I will talk about my 5 to 8 years experience around Tahrir Square. So this has started maybe 4 years before the revolution, and it's making its way into that. So before, during, and after, and we will end. Okay, so this is actually a definition on Wikipedia of what is social media. I mean, this is something I found last night. It's focusing on the web-based and mobile-based. Again, technology which used to people can communicate, active dialogue among organizations, communities. Pretty standard. I'm not going to deviate much from this definition. I'm just going to try to put a little bit of context for it with products, so you can understand basically where it's come from. There's being a scientist in origin, I'd like to bring the parameters that really make social media. And if you think about it, it's actually SMS is one form of social media. Emails is one form of social media. If you look at the spectrum, I mean, the difference is in the content, in the structure of the content. This one is unstructured content. This one is actually structured content. You get a full sentence in your Facebook, maybe. But you definitely get full sentences in email, and blogs is all about paragraphs. So if you're doing some analysis on them, here you need to be fully statistical. And here you need to rely on some language aspects in your analysis as well. So that's a spectrum. But the most important thing, actually, that is missing out of there is what's happening in the background. And that's where the money is, is this, the social graph. That's what makes Facebook today a company, is this social graph. It's the relationship between these people who are having this dialogue, is how you can actually construct the social graph. You can see that on the left, it's much harder to actually construct this social graph. But on the right, you definitely have all the means to do it. You even have people actually who can write down, basically, I am related to this person by so-and-so. So this is actually the connection, the content and the social graph. These are the two tools that will make money in the future. A lot of the applications that inspire revolutions today will be marketing tools, will be tools that actually bring students and professors together. I mean, there's a lot of talks right now about virtual classrooms. So these are the kind of things that you have to really envision as I go, how we actually can make it. And actually, we should encourage that, because in some sense, like I said at the beginning, if money finds its way into this technology, it will stay, and it will be big. And I think it's time to actually to happen, because we've been running very fast enough. So this is another form of social media. It lacks the social graph. It lacks the social graph, but it is actually one of the means that actually Egyptians used in Tahrir Square to express their opinions. And it's actually it's done, and they're still continuing now on, but I don't think there's a lot of money behind it. Historically, actually, this is actually the first probably form of social media. It's actually graffiti was the very first, and it was also used in the revolutions. We're not going to talk about them today, but they were there, so I'm just including them. By the way, Sharif Asaf, he works for Microsoft, so I have rights to use his pictures. Actually, he's a very talented young developer who actually took his camera and put his album as a gift for everybody to use. And he's a very talented photographer. So let's drill a little bit about trends before the revolution. I mean, this literally happened in 2005, 2006 when we landed there. And we didn't know what to do with this R&D center that we are about to start, what areas we should specialize on. But the one thing that really got our attention was the fact that Arabic-speaking individuals are the fastest growing numbers on the internet. This is, of course, in percentage over here. This is the number of users. And by the way, this is 2009 numbers. Believe it or not, I couldn't cut and paste from the report, the latest one, but it's 61 instead of 41. So that's the number that is running today. It's about, and this is not including basically Arabic-speaking individuals or those who are interested in Arabic content outside Arabia. So this is mainly by counting people basically who are connected to the internet in Arabia. So the numbers are growing, the content, but I think this is worth looking at. This is actually the fact that internet penetration is way below world averages. It is telling us that there is more growth to happen. I mean, this is probably credited to all the rich countries in Arabia, but the populations actually live somewhere else. So when the internet makes its way into the mass markets in places like Egypt, Algeria, I think the numbers will go dramatically up. We did some research on where this growth is coming from. Apparently, most of the content is digital content, and it is new. A lot of the historical content, the thing that's of a value today, are really hard to digitize. Just ask the Library of Alexandria, for example. They have an army of people working on digitization in the basement of the library. And their percentage or their production is dismal compared to the numbers that we see on the internet today. So where is this number coming from? I think the answer is here. Forums and blogosphere. That's what got us really interested in this, is actually the content is coming from the freedom that people found in the blogosphere. There are people posting like crazy. And that was before the revolution, just expressing their opinions. I would say the autocratic systems did not find a way to regulate that, but it was a little bit free. So people were discussing openly things. Other numbers, and this is actually from the recent report. It came from Dubai School of Government, November last year. The total number of Facebook users is the basically big thing. You can see it's doubled over 1 year, right about after the revolution. I would say that the adoption of youngsters of Facebook, so people who are under age 15 to 29, has been the clear thing. I did not talk about women because the averages of women adapting Facebook is much less than the world averages. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the trend is there, and it's huge. The number of Arab women who are now participating actively and engaging on Facebook is great. Now, what does that mean for the technology? Number one, it has to be in Arabic. So it has to cater to the Arab languages. The more mass market see this technology, the more it needs to talk their language. A lot of them actually access these sites and these tools through mobile phones. So mobile penetration is way, like 10-fold more than the internet penetration in many places. So the only access for internet comes from mobile phones. So the form factor and the interaction with the small device becomes a key for any success there. Egypt is not a surprise. If you want to really develop or capture some social trend, if you do it in Egypt, most likely it will spread fast into the rest of Arabia. And then basically the languages that we found there is a mix. You find a blog, and you will see some examples shortly here that has 3 languages. And by the way, there's a 4th language that is actually the main language right now, which language that includes numbers. It's phonetically. I mean, people were typing on Latin keyboards, and they had to basically express themselves, so they type in any way they agreed on. So they used the letter, the number 7, for example, for ha. It's not in Latin, so they had to come up with something, and that's an ain. Ain is 3. That's another thing. So and there is no consistency there. So, but this is actually a big chunk of data that we found in our lab, and we didn't know how to deal with it. So I'll show you some of the tools that came out of this. Without actually spending too much time, this is how we structured our lab. This is our areas of so the first thing is actually focus on content. Try to really envision basically things related to search. If you're really using internet, using your phone, you want to have things ready for you. So there is search that happens on your behalf without even you asking for it. So that was the concept. Actually, the search has to happen on content of a language that we're not expert at, like Microsoft. Usually pay attention to the tier 1 languages. So Arabic has become basically now all of a sudden an important thing for us to understand how to deal with it, even from a statistical perspective. The second thing was this community interaction and the social media. It was very clear that this is something that is growing fast, and we really need to capitalize on it, even if by understanding this new language that people talk together with. And the last but not least is definitely the mobile element in it. So mobile is important. I need to also mention the fact that when you deal with mobile and you get literacy levels are very low in Arabia. And people tend to use multimedia much more than text forms. So if you're dealing with mobile, you probably want to focus on multimedia content. And what is special about mobile multimedia, as we call it? Cameras are poor, and the photographer is an amateur with a handshaking and a lot of. So it's a good land field for signal processing people, for vision groups to really try to use their technologies and actually create some quality or put some quality in the production of these content. All right, am I going in the right direction? Okay, so this is actually my first demo. So these are examples actually I brought. We worked on all of these things. The first thing is what I'm going to show you is actually, this is the 5-year or 6-year-old kind of tool that we developed to really understand what's going on in the block sphere. This is just from scratch. It's like, what are these guys are talking about? And we had one of our sharpest engineer, it's a she, came right out of college, and let's hope that these things will work because they are on a server somewhere in Cairo. I see. Here you go. So I'll be doing the narration, but you will see a short movie about this tool. It's an internal tool that we are using to look at the block sphere. If you're not familiar with the tag cloud, tag cloud is basically, the words here are the most frequently used in the population of content that we're looking at. For example, we have this nice map of Arabia. You click on any of the countries, you get a blog aggregator, basically content from the blogs that were published in this country. And then we create this tag cloud, which basically shows the words that are actually most frequently used in the cloud, in the blogs. The more bold and big in size, the more frequent the word is mentioned. You can click on the word and you can see what's been discussed around it. And the nice thing is actually Hiba, or the lady who actually worked on this, she actually created this time scale also, allow you to really look on a specific day in a specific year. You can group a week. You can look at a week worth of data. And here is basically when you click on it, it shows you basically for Firefox was the word that she used for this demo. This is where it's mentioned in this. It's an amazing tool. I mean, from a research perspective, we took this as a training sets. I mean, if we want to create a tool that deals with this new language that people use, here's perfect sense. If you want to politically understand what's going on during that period of time in this country, you can get it. I will tell you an example that we never published for many reasons, but there was a fiasco between Egypt and Algeria at one point because of a soccer game. And there was a conspiracy theory that it's intentional, that some of the regimes actually intentionally created this buildup of emotions between the crowds so this thing can happen and distract people from. So we had an intern actually from Canada. He was spending the summer in Egypt, and actually he analyzed the blogs published in Algeria and in Egypt for almost 3 months, which is the time between the first game and the last game that they played together. And the conclusion was there was no intentional buildup. There was nothing in the blogs that has to do with soccer. I mean, there was some, but not to the extent that we are. But there was one topic, actually, that was discussed heavily on the blogs in Egypt. So if you're really into conspiracy theory, you can use your imagination. But it was about the son of Mubarak. That was the topic at that time. So if you're a fan of conspiracy theory like myself, you'll say, oh, they did that to distract the crowd from doing that. But there was nothing else that scientifically we can prove out of this. But it's an example of how you use a tool like this. We did a little bit of actually work on understanding the context of content published on Facebook and blogs related to actually understanding the influence factor in it. This actually, when we really combined the text analysis with some of the statistical analysis, this is when we looked, for example, on bag of words that are actually can be trending into positive influence or negative influence. Understanding and extracting these words from the context was big area of research for us. And then we got into, if we can really give a score for a piece of a blog, maybe we can actually do the same thing about the blogger himself or herself. Maybe we can identify people who are more central in a group and basically single them out. So we did some of that work. And then basically we did mining of multimedia content. So this is, again, taking us into the mobile space. Can I actually create value to the users from a piece of movie that they created for fun, for example, by identifying things, or the technical word for that is you recognize objects in it automatically. And then you have the internet. You can go on the internet and create the labels. If you work in multimedia in any way, you know that we're accumulating multimedias like photos and movies on our hard drives without any ways to organize it. So there has to be automatic means to organize it. And that will happen only if you create labels automatically for this content. And that was one area of research. Linking social media is, of course, basically when you want to organize, and you will see that actually in my very last example of technologies that actually we're working on at this point. So I will defer that now. And then applying social media in education. I wish I brought this demo. I was talking to Mike right before this talk, because this is actually where it comes together, actually, when you see this is why technology was created. So in Egypt, the public schools, the public universities, they're averaging about 200,000 students per university. I remember Steve Ballmer, who runs Microsoft, actually was visiting Egypt, and we were giving him this stats in the briefing, and he said, how do they manage this? And the answer is no, they don't manage it. It just basically they have to accommodate all these numbers. So the average number, it turned out that the average number in public schools of students in one class is 2,500. So imagine 2,500 sitting in one class. There's zero interaction between the professor and the students. And when we thought about how can we help, I mean, people were talking about today's technologies like whiteboards. Let's bring whiteboards and let people basically, and it's like laptop for everybody. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense. It won't scale for these numbers. So the idea of actually social media came when we realized that over 70 to 80% of them have some social media account, whether it's email or Facebook. So they're already on the media. They're already on the internet. It's just a matter of actually finding a way to connect them with the professors. So we created this tool that actually allow them, per the professor suggestion, to discuss a topic on a forum. And then we use all these technologies that we've been talking about, from identifying basically the most influential posters and ranking them. So give back this to the professor, a nice tool basically that sits on his desktop that with a click he can get the top 10 contributor to the discussion this week. And then he can read one or two of their postings and go back and actually make a comment in the classroom about this person who sits between 3,000 people and say, yeah, I liked what you said yesterday. Imagine what this can bring to the dynamics of the classroom. It's huge, and it's all about social media. I mean, all the stuff that we can make money of can also be applied in a very noble way, hopefully in virtual classrooms and stuff like this in the future. But that's something that I didn't bring with me. I apologize for that. I was trying to do that in the worst time for us at Microsoft. This is the performance reviews time, and Andrew here knows how tedious this process is, but it occupies managers. So let's talk a little bit about during the revolution. I mean, this is the view before the revolution. We knew that there is actually a social trend. We knew that basically a lot of the youngsters are already latching in it. We didn't know what they're using it for. There's one term that I want to throw in that is probably not going to be part of my discussion, but it's very important. It's a crowdsourcing. It's a marketing term. Basically, if you ever read the book The Tipping Point, It's actually a very popular marketing book in business schools. It talks about how can you actually predict if a product can be successful, will be successful or not, through this analysis that you do on some pilots that they run. So you can imagine that this actually concept was used to predict when the revolution can happen, when the crowd can actually be sourced in the streets. I think that's as much as the credit that social media should get in the Arab Spring Revolution, is the ability to actually predict that now is the time. Basically, this is actually, the crowd will come if these pockets move to the streets. And the technology for that is the same technology that's used for marketing today around crowdsourcing. So I'm not going to speak about it, but it is a big way of making money, especially in advertisement now. So this is the time that I actually should mention that my wife is sitting in the audience. This is probably the first time ever that she listened to me speaking. And she's a linguist. She warned me from saying photosense. Okay, I have to say photosense. Okay, so this is the time that actually her advice comes handy. If you don't know what photosense is, it's a technology or tool that Microsoft actually made available. You can start using it. Actually, it's available in our sites. It started an actual collaboration between University of Washington and Life Labs in Microsoft. But it's actually an amazing technology. It's a tool, again, related to social and mobile. Imagine basically the millions that were standing in front of Obama. 2 million is the count for his inauguration, taking photos with mobile cameras. Low resolution, usually poor quality. And like we said, it's narrow band. And you get all these pictures in one place, and you create a fantastic experience by stitching them together. So basically, engineers and scientists were able to stitch these photos together and then move you in and out these movies. I mean, you can zoom in and zoom out, just like you do with high-resolution pictures. But what they do is they actually move you from one picture to another that was taken from shorter distance. And they do that in a seamless way that you really think that this is fantastic. And it's very cheap. I tried it even on my home. Basically, I took some pictures around, and I plugged it into the tool, and I got a fantastic experience of actually moving things around. The only thing is actually we had an intern again who was part of a bigger project, but he did this for fun. He created actually a photo sense for Tahrir Square. And this is what came out of it. And we tried to stay away from showing people because we don't have rights for it. I knew that I'm going to talk about it in public one day. And we didn't want to actually have someone coming after us because we showed his picture or her picture in the talk. But this is actually an example. I mean, when I zoom out, you can see that there are multiple pictures. They're not there, and they're stitched together. And you can go as close as you want. Depends on the resolution, of course. But this is actually a historical hotel, the 9 Hilton. Now it's bought by Ritz-Carlton. It's under renovation. This is actually this is a famous national party that was burned down during the revolution. And if you don't realize how close it is to the famous Egyptian museum, this is how close they are. So this is why everybody was scared during that time, because there was flames, there was no police or no one even to distinguish this thing, and it's right next to the museum with all the treasures that sits there. So this is an example of something that is funny enough that the media picked up this tool and they start to actually showing it in a fancy way. You don't need an expensive, basically, cameras to show the 3D rendering of this square, but that's actually something that the people were happy to see us producing it. Okay, let me do this. Okay. All right, so one of our youngsters was inspired by PhotoSense and said, but guess what? Most of the news feeds during the revolution was coming from citizens passing over movies that they took with their mobile. That's what you see on CNN and BBC, and that's actually, most of it is amateur movies that came out of. Can we do that? And a lot of them actually, they come in multiples. So people were volunteering, hey, I picture this movie in the street. Oh, look at how they did to this young lady or this. And you get like half a dozen of them immediately from people picturing it. So he said, what if I actually do the same exact thing that PhotoSense did, but for real-time video? And this is, imagine what this can impact, the impact that this can have on citizen journalism. The iReporter kind of concept that you see on CNN today, if you start to actually feed it with high-quality movies that is stitched already, coming from cheap cameras that you normally see on your phones that comes from somewhere in Taiwan. So that's what they did. And they got actually really good, hopefully this will work. Looks like it is. So this is actually, this is a scientific, this is not a product. It's a research project. But it shows actually that this can be done. This is actually the famous bridge that was full of demonstrators at one point and during the revolution. 3 cameras on top. And then below you'll see the stitched movie. If this happened in real time, this is actually the challenge, that they made it happen in real time. So you will see basically he's bringing them together and then spread them out and seeing that stitching can really happen. And you can see the difference. So that's a concept that we were promoting with Vodafone. At one point, we were actually going to embark on a collaboration with Vodafone to start to have video streaming part of actually citizen journalism initiative in Egypt, only inspired by the revolution again. This one I will leave to the end because I need to type a few things, but it's actually, it's a demonstration of a tool that this is the most popular thing that came out of the lab, by the way. Andrew knows this very well. It's called Marin, stands for Microsoft Arabic English. And it's simply basically a tool that statistically takes what you type on a Latin keyboard and predict what it means in Arabic. So it used the phonetic understanding. But actually what it does it in a statistical way. And can you guess where the data came from to really understand statistically what the data means? Is the block sphere, is the tool that I showed you early on. Exactly, that's what most of the data came from. We took it and we actually used it as a black box to mine the input from the users. And statistically, I think this is, at one point, was downloaded more than Internet Explorer in Arabia because how much people loved it. I never typed any documents in Arabic, and I can, and I can it very fast too. So thanks to this thing, I'll demonstrate this at the end, and move into the after the revolution, and that require a short story again with it. So when the revolution was happening, I was in Brussels, and the director of the lab there was calling me saying that corporate security are calling me every day to check on the employee. And I know for sure that all of them are in Tahrir Square, but I have to tell them that everybody is okay. Is there any liability on me personally, because I'm lying simply. I know that they are actually throwing rocks down there, but I'm telling the corporate security that everything is cool and we're safe and everything. What should I do? And it was actually a moment of inspiration for me. I said, well, tell them that there's a status meeting tomorrow and I will attend it myself, so they need to be there. And we got there, the emotions were really high, and people were like looking at me as like, how dare you telling us to pull out? I mean, this is very national, and we really need to be part of it. And my pit talk to them was, hey, you know a little bit more than the average fellow who's standing there throwing rocks. You know technology. And you have a full permission to use our tools, our servers, whatever you learned with us, to come up with ideas. I mean, that's what really these people need, not another one of you throwing rocks with them. So we gave them permission to work on anything independently, away from their projects, to work on something related to the revolution that is inspired by whatever they learned in the lab. And you wouldn't believe what came out of this. I mean, there are people who were sleeping literally in the lab, trying to come up with new ideas or do things. And there was a lot of things that actually we didn't do anything with. but enough, basically, to get a new concepts out. And now we're basically dusting off some of these ideas and putting it together in a nice money-making, basically, products that probably you will be surprised to see coming out of this lab today. So this is a simple thing that actually started. This is actually collaboration with Vodafone, and I have to give this plug because they're the sponsors of my talk today. So Vodafone Egypt actually worked with us, and we basically built a system that takes SMS from people. Basically, there will be a question on the media somehow, and people will answer the question using SMS to a specific number that was advertised by Vodafone. And this made it into one TV channel and MSN Arabia. So the outcome from this, or the revenues generated by these SMSs was donated to rebuilding Egypt or some sort of charity contribution related to the revolution. And that was Vodafone basically doing, not us. What we did is we built this box, which is actually taking all our understanding of the languages and analyzing the SMSs, extracting basically the answers to the question, try to understand what is. I mean, SMS is a very short. I mean, it stands for a short message. So running analysis on it is not easy. But when you do it in numbers and you do classifiers on them, to really say that, okay, this is what most people actually voted for, or this is what most people think is the right answer. I mean, you can ask a question, who do you think is the next president for Egypt, for example? And people will answer anything. Tarek. They can put Tarek, and he will show up as a very small dip in the histogram. And then basically you get, so this is what the classifier will do. So that's basically what we did. It was very popular, actually. In fact, we got a lot of requests to productize this, and we don't have even a capability to productize something in our lab. I mean, we have to go through the corporate venues, and that's a big, slow kind of process. It will never happen. So we offered actually to license this to one of the partners and let them do it, but this never saw the light anyway. But another one, which is actually maturing pretty much these days, is that after the revolution, actually, there was a lot of noise. Many new faces. I mean, people did not recognize any of these faces before the revolution. And there were a lot of people who were talking with agendas, people without agendas. People couldn't tell who is sincere and who is basically an agent for some campaign. So what this is actually a technology that, if you think about it, is actually by understanding the credibility. It's sentiment analysis. That's the scientific term for it. If we can really understand what people say about a character, we can put him in a certain class and say, this is a credible, or at least the audience think this is a credible person. This will never happen without the social networking content. Today, most of the news feeds go to Facebook. This is a very nice way for them to distribute their news, by the way. So CNN, BBC, everybody has a feed to not only that actually it helped them distribute but their content, but it also get them the feedback. So they get the likes, the tweets, everything. They come to them for free with it. So there's actually, I don't know of any single news feed today that doesn't make its way into Facebook. We get this data, we analyzing, we know how many people like this person, don't like this person, criticize this person from their postings, and that's the text analysis part that we do. And that's basically a tool that we released very recently, and it does basically the exercise. This is the one that I hope it just works. It's running on the server, and for some reason, I'm getting the English version of it. Maybe because I have an English audience. But when the main developers who worked on it were walking me through it yesterday, it was all in Arabic. So I don't know. Maybe they changed it on me. But if it works, it will come up actually as a tool that we just released. Here you go. And it shows you basically these are random characters that we picked in our database today. And like I said, I mean, the one that I saw yesterday was full of Egyptian faces. Today I'm seeing the American or English version of it. The idea here is actually you can click on any of them, or you can search for a specific one. And then I picked basically someone like Steve Jobs, for example, because Steve Jobs is someone that everybody knows that he was not very popular until he died. So this is the absolute truth. I'm a big fan of the guy, but when I read basically his biography, I was like, whoa. But what you're seeing here is the analysis or the sentiment analysis of Steve Jobs as it basically goes up and down in time. So you can click on YD, for example. I mean, you can see that Steve Jobs, in his own words, basically there's a original post somewhere, said something that made people don't like him, or at least didn't like. So and like a way you go to Facebook for that. See. So this is actually a tool that takes you in and out the social content, and it shows you basically, and here is getting a little bit more popular. Let's close this. Let's see, this for example is breaking the AB. Oh, of course, it has died. So you see, this is peaked all of a sudden because Steve Jobs has died. So that's one view. The other view is the positive, negative, and neutral. You can see it in kind of a cumulative way. So the red is negative sentiment, the green is popular, and then the neutral one is the yellow one. You can do that, or you can do also the aggregate view of things. So
popularity peaked at zero. What does that mean? Is popularity peaked at zero?
Peaked at zero at the beginning? Probably I need to switch in time. See, this is the part where you will like. So look at this. This is actually time scale. I can include people. Let's say Clinton, future Romney, yeah, and Pineda. Three unrelated, slightly unrelated fellows, but it tells you the red is unpopular. The more red it is, if it's and you can change the time scale. This is basically what the time is zero is the answer to your question, Andrew. Is actually it may be that this is where they started to collect, so it was time of zero. But you can pick a time, and you can move the slot and say, okay, at this point of time, this is how these three people compared. And then if you move a little bit further, they become equal, so people didn't really care about any of them. And here's someone completely disappeared. We didn't have any data on him, so he was not even in the media at that time. So that's actually a use. I mean, you can imagine that this is actually can be done on products. Now that Microsoft is in the phone business, they would like to see how their phone compares to the other two big competitors to us, how people think about them, and how actually are we really making progress in getting into a decent user experience that people like. So that's a money-making opportunity as well. And then basically we go into the last demo, which is actually, again, an aggregator of a lot of the concept that we were talking about, but this time we did it for articles, news articles. The concept here is people are reading articles now. I mean, there's tons of new, even news groups that's coming up out of Arabia in general. And people are really into reading articles, engaged. This is one form of engagement, I guess. This is actually, for my wife, is a great tool because she doesn't read anything in the newspaper except the articles. She goes right into the columns and actually read them. And for her to get a ranked list. So this is actually about a ranked list. This is This is an article that's the most popular. It came because it has a lot of likes in Facebook. Many people tweeted on it. And this specific author is actually, he writes on politics today, he writes on social concepts tomorrow, religion. I mean, every day he picks a topic to write on. So if we can classify his article into one of these buckets, then my wife will be happier because she can scroll down and she can get basically the part that talks about politics, the part that talks about... So this is on a daily basis. And if I keep it up, you will see that this is a live tool and it's being ranked as we speak. It wouldn't happen again unless the news groups started to have feeds into Facebook, unlike, and to have people to tweet on it as plug-in. So this is actually the evolution of the media business. Actually, people will start to have these concepts built in our life, and they're all driven by what we call the social graph at the beginning. The social graph is a money maker like nobody can understand today, but it's huge. If I can understand that my third relatives will be interested in the sport that my son is playing, maybe I can do that. Microsoft Bing, if you're not familiar with Bing, it's the search engine that we're trying to compete with Google on. Very recently, actually, they added on the side, you find what we call Bing Expert. So when you run your query, you will get a list of people that you know. This is actually coming from your Facebook social graph that may know something about this query. It comes in basically as like maybe a place. If you're looking for a restaurant in London, I will get Andrew Blake to suggest something for me because he's on my list of friends and he also lives close to London, so he would be the one who will suggest that to me. And that's the kind of things that is building up. I mean, these are things that advertisers will love to see, this connection. And it's going to make a lot of money in the future. So with that, I think that's the last part of my talk. And I will go back quickly and demonstrate Marin. And I will be done. Okay, let's go out here. In fact, actually, I will demonstrate Marin live. So I don't need to go to their site. Marin is integrated in Windows. When you download it, it's a free tool. You go to our site, afkar.com, which is actually, in Arabic, afkar means ideas, so ideas.com. It's on Microsoft.com. But if I want to actually edit a slide live here, go add a new slide, and have this slide in Arabic. So I'll go and switch into Marin, and I'll type. I'll say, for example, I'm in the Royal Academy, but I will write it in Arabic. So Royal means Malaki. So I'll do. Notice that all the letters I'm typing are Latin. Those are the top ones, okay? Okay. That's what it is. Okay, academy is academia. That's the thing. So I write it academia. Came up. If any of you knows Arabic, you will see that this is actually true. I'm not making this up. So, engineering, of course, هندسة, الهندسة. I saw some people here. And am I right? Who knows Arabic in the room? Okay, is this right? Would you imagine that I will make this up? Because I'm typing so fast. This is how I pronounce it. And I'll basically end with, is thank you very much in an Egyptian way. Basically, alf shukr means thousands of shukran or thousands of thank you. So that's how I ended my talk today. This is a tool that's available, and it was so popular, and I think it's the flagship of the lab that I just described the work coming out of them. But I hope you like it. It's more or less an inspiration. It's a good time for all of us in Arabia to feel the freedom and feel the breath of air, fresh air coming up. I'm optimistic. I think what's happening even now is a really good thing, is actually people started to speak up, and nobody will quiet them down again since they know it's so easy to change it if they want. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer. I can speculate that they were so far behind. But I don't think that they are that far behind. I think they started to look at this very carefully nowadays. Even the last couple of years after the revolution, we can see how actually the sentiment, basically, artificially moving in one way or the other. So there are obviously a lot of actually filtering that needs to happen. So you can imagine that the sentiment analysis that we were doing on people can happen on events, can happen it can sway public opinions in one way or the other. And it was very clear with someone that I really respect highly, Dr. Elabbady, who was actually was nominated at one point, and he was an instigator of this revolution, and how basically the old regime used these channels was very obvious to really drive negative sentiment about the guy and the guy's history and the guy's reputation. It was a matter of actually seconds when he posts something on his Facebook account or tweet that you get basically over hundreds of negative, orchestrated. These things disappeared almost immediately after Mubarak went down. Immediately. I mean, when Mubarak was in power, the guy will post a one-liner and he gets basically 2 pages full of insults and anything you can imagine of. Immediately after it went. And then it came back again. And came back for political reasons, for people who disagreed with his views or whatever. And you can see that the roots are still there, and they started to know how to use these kind of tools. So definitely there is the positives and negatives of this, and the technology is like anything else. It's a sword with two sides. I mean, you can imagine that. We need to do a lot of work on filtering some of these artificial, what I call injections of the social minds. So we can see some of these actually technologies making it into tools that can be used to filter out actually some of the untrue concepts. I can tell you that where the business is going at this point is to the concept of cloud computing, and cloud computing by itself is a distributed kind of technology, and it forces in the interoperability as part of it, because I don't envision a company owning all the data centers around the world and controlling it. So this will by default, from a technical perspective, will force the distributed concept of the technology to happen. The other trend is actually the consumerization of IT. Is actually, if you look at the number of products in technology today compared to 15 or 20 years ago, they're huge. The number of companies who works in technology, they're huge. Without any centrality. I mean, there is some basically classes who are bigger than others, but in reality, there's a lot of technology companies around there. This is a reflection of the fact that technology is becoming a consumer product. And what's going to drive the consumer adoption is the user experience, this thing that we always talk about. And the user experience will happen in one tiny street in Egypt that probably not the company who's making the technology in the US know anything about. So the decentralization of the technology is going to happen driven by the globalization of the business and the consumerization aspect of the technology, and the fact that actually we are moving into this cloud concept that selling technology as a service is also forcing it into. So I think it's happening. In the distinction between peer-to-peer and central servers is actually a very technical term that I think we are shifting away from it quickly. It's becoming an evolution point that I don't think it's going to determine which way we're going to go. It's going to be whoever's going to own the user experience of the users is going to control the business in their region, and then whoever wants to get into this business has to negotiate or bargain with this user experience owner, and this will come from different kind of sources that they all work the same. They all have to offer the same thing to this end user at the end. So I think what we're seeing right now is a huge shift in the business of technology, and in the next 5-10 years, there will be new business models that we're going to basically drive the future of. But I'm definite that social, the aspect of social, this concept of social graphs, going to be instrumental in the future of the business in the future and this technology. Excellent question. Excellent question. And I don't know, John. I didn't set him up to ask this question, but it's a beautiful question, and it hits very close to my aspirations. It's actually this. We were just talking about semi-retirement in a few years and wanting to go back and have an impact on youngsters and teach again in colleges. One of the things actually that was an aha for me personally during this revolution is the level of maturity and confidence that the young people who drove this revolution actually were speaking with. Their competence. I swear, we lived in the US for 20 years as a family, and then we moved back for 4 years to live in Egypt. And we thought this is actually heaven for us because we almost tailor-made the job that I created in Egypt for myself to go back, and now I live close to my parents. And we were sadly surprised of the deterioration that happened actually in the infrastructure, and it reflected big way on the human being, is actually the manners of the people. So we were really sadly surprised, and we didn't know whether we should be attached to this place anymore or not. And then here comes the revolution, and you see some of the people that you used to look down at. These youngsters actually were coming. I mean, the education system deteriorated to a level that we never felt before. I mean, this is something at all levels, as K to 12, as we call it. And colleges and universities. So where are these guys coming from? I mean, how they were self-educated. Okay, to some extent, the internet played a big role in bringing the awareness and giving them the confidence and opening resources for them. So to your question, I will advise tools that enhance or promote independent thinking, creativity. This comes from a lot of electives, if you're talking about curriculums specifically. A lot of open discussions and collaborative kind of environments that needs to be happening. Give these guys the tools, give the youngsters tools, and let them inspire. So a lot of the concepts that's now being evolved in the US around virtual education and big universities like MIT and others are actually putting their content available for free on the web is a step to get there. Is actually these people only need the subjects, needs the tools and the means, and then guidance and standardized tests. But I will go after independent thinking. I mean, this is the one thing that actually I will say energize the human being is actually to feel like my thinking has a contribution. I can contribute to the world in this way or that, and it's different. It's really different. I'm very analytic. I'm very scientific. My daughter is taking completely opposite career. It's hard on me. I can't resist to say that, but it's actually something that I have to promote. I mean, she's into arts. I'm fine. I mean, that's the concept. And I see the success or the good systems. It's all coming from the freedom that they give to the students. It will require a lot of actually education to the educators, not the students. I think it's a split. If you have an investment in a school, maybe you want to split half of it on educating the educators as much as you spend it on educating the students themselves, because it's all about new tools and new concepts. Like the one we were talking about, it's very hard to bring basically the old classical teacher into concept of forums and monitoring discussions on forums. So I think a lot of choices for the students, empowering them to make their own choices and to live to their responsibility, will be the way to do it, and rely heavily on tools that may look strange today, but I mean, we were pleasantly surprised with the young generations in this part of the world who came out self-educated. So just give it a chance. Thanks.
Another question from the gentleman at the front here.
You're very aggressive because just by reaching out to our friends, this is new. This is actually getting out of the box. I mean, we used to actually make opinions and decisions based on our own, basically, ideologies or own way of thinking. Now that we're reaching out to friends, this is actually going out of the box. You want to go even beyond the social network. So I would say that this is a step further out. But maybe I use the restaurant as a bad example. Let me give another example, actually, that relates to a lot of the students in the rooms. Actually, how many times when you get an assignment from your professor to go to the library and do a research on a subject, and you get a stack of books from if you're really good with using search engines, which are now helping us a lot. When I was in college, it was very tedious search engines. So I would come up with a stack of like a dozen books, and usually the book that I really wanted is the last book in the stack, and I have to go through all of them to go to this one. So technologies like this can actually not only get you the recommendations from your friends, those who read this book and didn't like it, or those who made a comment about this book, and so it already will surface out basically the information that may be relevant to you. based on your colleagues in the classroom or based. But also, actually, it can, through some analysis of the content, we can actually dynamically link concepts in one book together. Okay, the same exact way we were doing this, basically some bag of word analysis. This paragraph is very close statistically to this paragraph that happened to be in 59 pages back. Or it can actually link it to another book. This dynamic linking concept can shorten the time for knowledge acquisition or information retrieval tremendously. So the sky is your limit for the information. You can do hubs between the steps that you take to acquire this information through your social network, through tools like this can tie basically what's available, the content. And this is where the content meet the social graph. And this is why I wanted to make the distinction between the two. I mean, there's definitely value in this and a value in this. And when you bring them together, the value is maximized. So that's where I want to unleash the limit. I don't know basically what is the limit that we can go to, but it is a very tangible value that can come to students tomorrow by simply using content analysis. If you add the social graph in it, it makes it even faster. So the time for research can be shortened by huge factors. So that's I hope answer your question to some extent. But I will say that your aspiration is more aggressive than what I talked about. I mean, we're right now trying to get people to really look at their sides. This is what my cousin thinks. This is what my friend thinks. Moving outside the box, even in wider circles, I think it will happen. But when we get at least adoption at the friends and family level first. Hopefully this addresses it. But it's a good topic for research, by the way. Very interesting.
Another question at the very back there.
This is a problem when you put an engineer on computer science problems. Seriously, I'm an engineer too, so I have to be on your side here. We tend to be analytic in our thinking, and specifically, you're trying to analyze a problem and to look for the solution. Most computer science problems are done statistically. There is a big probability factors here in perception. I will say for a tool like this to be measured, it's about the user experience, which is something that is very fuzzy and is very hard to measure. But it can be measured through the adoption of the tool. Marin, which we talked about, this tool that allow you to statistically understand what people are writing on Latin keyboards, was highly adopted because it's very precise. I mean, the people were really trying to challenge the tool using words that are like slang that's coming out basically these days in the streets, and it catch it. So they got more believers. So I think the only way to measure, and this is how you see the disclaimer beta on Google till today, on Microsoft Bing till today, there's beta releases. This is not a final release. So nobody can actually ask us the question, is this precise? How do you know that this is actually captured every... So this concept of releasing it and watching the adoption, this idea of crowdsourcing is also a measure of predictive measure that allow people to predict whether this technology that we just released is really successful or not. But it's a probabilistic measure. You cannot standardize this. You cannot basically go back and say, hey, Google, you've been advertising the wrong ads on my... I mean, if you pay money for Google, basically, this is... But the only way they make the precision point to the customer is the number of people who visit the site of the customer through the advertisement that Google advertised. So that it's a secondary thing, but it's actually, this is as much as you can measure it. but not in an engineering way, not in a standard way. So that's all of them basically has to be released, and we watch basically how people adopt them and how many of them, and that can tell whether we're really accurate hitting it or not. New York. It's very interesting. Now you're making me put the hat of politician on. It's like, I don't know if I can be good at it. But I can tell you that one of the things that are actually the size of the problem in Egypt was a big factor. Population is another big factor. I mean, the size of the problem is manifested itself in the social separation. So there was millions and millions of people who were oppressed and were pressured and were ready for, and like I said, all these technologies were just the instigators. They're not actually the reason behind the revolution. So there was a big reason waiting for a small flame to burst. I mean, so that if you can't create that anywhere else, you probably will see the same reaction. Smaller countries. I mean, we used to basically, I mean, there's a term that they use for the Tahrir gathering every Friday is actually, they call it millionia, which is actually coming from million. So it's at least million people to show up. That's the kind of concept. It's like, let's call a millionia, which means like, let's have 1 million people in there. How many countries actually in the region who can actually gather 1 million people in one place that fast? So these are all maybe specific about Egypt. But I will say that the biggest thing is actually the size of the problem was a big factor in making the big splash around the Egyptian revolution. It was really bad and huge social separation. Very small class of people who controlled all the resources. So yeah. I don't know where else this is happening. I don't want to get into that, but definitely there is a room for this to happen somewhere else in the world.
Well, thank you. Can I thank you once again for a splendid talk and for stimulating a very interesting discussion this evening. So we thank you.